The air was thick with the scent of fresh lies and old money as the funeral home buzzed with activity. The place was packed. Executives in sharp suits, former colleagues murmuring behind their expensive handkerchiefs, and family members who hadn't spoken in years suddenly coming together to fake their grief. I stood by my father's closed casket, staring at the golden nameplate. William Davis, beloved father, visionary businessman, and self-made mogul. The whispers around me weren't about sorrow, they were about the Davis fortune who would take over the empire. Everyone had their own theories. My father had turned a small startup into an $80 million powerhouse, and as his only daughter, the one who had stood by him the longest, I had assumed I'd be the one to carry on his legacy. I worked under him for 6 years, learning everything there was to know about the business. I had the degrees, the experience, and most importantly, his trust. But when I met my brother's gaze across the room, a chill settled in my chest. Jackson was too calm, too smug, too well prepared. I should have seen it then. But grief has a way of blinding you. It wasn't until later that day, when I walked into my father's headquarters to meet with the board, that the truth hit me. I entered the CEO's office expecting to see my father's desk untouched, his old leather chair still waiting for the next rightful owner. But instead, I found Jackson, lounging in the chair with his feet up on the desk, sipping whiskey from our father's favorite crystal glass. My father had been buried less than 12 hours ago, and already my brother had made himself at home. I froze in the doorway. "What are you doing?" I asked. Jackson smirked, swirling the whiskey. "Getting comfortable," he said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. I clenched my jaw. "This isn't your office." He laughed, really laughed, a deep, genuine laugh before setting the glass down and pulling a folder from the desk. He slid a sheet of paper toward me. I hesitated before picking it up. Last Will and Testament was printed in bold at the top. Under the section titled Inheritance and Succession, I felt my blood run cold. Everything, the company, the estate, the bank accounts, had been left to Jackson. I swallowed hard. "This is a mistake." Jackson's grin widened, wolf-like. "No, Sophia, it's not." I scanned the words again, desperately hoping for a loophole, some way this could be wrong. But there it was, my father's signature at the bottom. His words. His wishes. Jackson leaned forward, lowering his voice into a taunting whisper. "I own everything now." He tilted his head, feigning sympathy. "You have nothing." I should have cried, I should have screamed, maybe even fallen apart, but instead, I started laughing. A week ago, I had already made my move. Jackson's smirk faltered as my laughter echoed through the office. He expected me to break, to beg, to lash out, to collapse under the weight of betrayal. Instead, I wiped away a tear, not of sorrow but amusement, and took a seat across from him, crossing my legs like we were simply discussing business. Jackson frowned. "What's so funny?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. The one Jackson thought was his now. "Nothing," I said, smiling sweetly. "It's just that you really think you won, don't you?" He scoffed. "Sophia, there's nothing to think about. It's right there in black and white." He tapped the will with his finger. "Dad left everything to me. You're out." I picked up the document, turning it over, pretending to really consider his words. Then I set it down gently. "I guess you didn't hear the news then." Jackson's cocky expression wavered slightly. I let the silence stretch between us, watching him squirm. "News?" he asked, his voice tight with suspicion. I tilted my head, savoring the moment. "The board hasn't called you yet?" His eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" I smiled. Now it was my turn to toy with him. "You see, Jackson, while you were busy scheming and getting comfortable in Dad's chair, I was making sure his true wishes were honored." I let that hang in the air before pulling out my phone. With a few swipes, I opened an email and turned the screen toward him. An official letter from the Davis Enterprises legal team. Jackson snatched the phone from my hand, his eyes scanning the email. His smirk vanished. This is impossible," he muttered. "Oh, it's very possible," I said, leaning back and enjoying the look of confusion and anger twisting his face. The email detailed a company bylaw that Jackson had clearly overlooked. Our father had left him the company, yes, but the board had the final say in who could actually run it. While Jackson might have inherited the title, he didn't automatically inherit control. The board had to approve the successor, and after reviewing his lack of experience, financial recklessness, and utter lack of leadership skills, they had unanimously voted to reject his appointment as CEO. Jackson's hand clenched around the phone. This is a joke. I'm the rightful heir." I shrugged. "You're the legal heir, sure, but Dad knew you couldn't run this place." I took a slow breath, letting my next words sink in. "So, a week ago, he gave me power of attorney." Jackson's head snapped up. "What?" I reached into my bag and pulled out another document. This one signed and legally binding. "I have full control over company operations," I said, placing it on the desk. "And the board? They back me." Jackson's face turned bright red. "Dad wouldn't—" "He would, and he did," I interrupted, "because he knew you'd do exactly this." I gestured around the office. "He knew you'd get drunk on power, make rash choices, and eventually ruin everything." Jackson shot to his feet so fast that his whiskey glass nearly toppled over. "You think you're clever?" He spat, his voice sharp. "But I own this company." I stood up too, matching him across the desk, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. We locked eyes, and I could feel the weight of the battle between us filling the room. He was already calculating his next move, desperately trying to find some loophole, some way to turn the situation to his favor. But there was nothing he could do. I had been preparing for this moment for years. I had been watching, studying, and understanding exactly how he worked. While he spent those years waiting for Dad to die so he could swoop in and take over, I spent those same years making sure he never would. Jackson exhaled sharply, his jaw clenching tighter. "This isn't over, Sophia," he growled. I smiled. "Oh, I know this is just the beginning." Jackson's anger was practically palpable. I could see it in his posture, the way his fists clenched at his sides, his shallow breathing, the flare of his nostrils. He wasn't used to being outplayed. For years, he had been the golden child, getting by on charm, entitlement, and the idea that everything would fall into his lap. But charm doesn't keep a company running, and entitlement doesn't override legal documents. I watched him scramble, trying to come to terms with the fact that the company he thought was his was slipping away from his grasp. "You still don't get it, do you?" I said, settling back into my chair, completely at ease while he fumed. "Dad might have left you the company, but he didn't leave you the power. That part has to be earned." His face darkened with anger. "This is my company." I tilted my head, a smirk tugging at my lips. "Then why is the board meeting with me tomorrow, not you?" His mouth opened, then snapped shut as the realization hit him. He was truly trapped. He wasn't respected by the board. He wasn't respected by the employees. And without them, he was just a man with a title and an empire he had no idea how to run. He grabbed the will again, flipping through it as if searching for a hidden clause that would undo everything I had just told him. I let him scramble. I let him search. It didn't matter. I was ready for this moment. He wasn't. Finally, he slammed the paper down in frustration. "Dad always wanted me to take over. You must have manipulated him into signing that power of attorney." I laughed, a light, almost mocking sound. "Manipulated him? No. Dad knew exactly what he was doing." I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "Do you honestly think he trusted you with an $80 million company when you can't even manage your own credit card debt?" His face flushed with a deep red as he took in my words. I couldn't help but smirk. "Oh yes, I knew, because while you were out partying, blowing through cash, and making reckless investments, I was watching, documenting, and preparing." "Let's talk numbers, shall we?" I said, my voice dripping with sweetness. "The house in the Hamptons? Over-leveraged? The sports cars? All leased. And those so-called business investments? More like luxury vacations disguised as networking events." Jackson's jaw tightened, but I wasn't done. "You see, the board loves results. They love discipline. They love strategy." I shrugged. "And between the two of us, guess who actually knows how to keep a company profitable?" He didn't answer, because deep down, he already knew. I let the silence hang in the air, stretching it out before delivering my final blow. Oh, and one more thing. I reached into my bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. Dad wrote this for you before he passed. Jackson hesitated for a moment before snatching it from my hand. His fingers trembled as he tore it open and unfolded the letter. I already knew what it said. I had read my version just last week. Jackson, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And if I know you as well as I think I do, you're probably furious right now. But let me be clear, this was your doing, not mine. I watched you, son, for years. I watched you make reckless choices, squander opportunities, and expect rewards you never earned. I had hoped you would prove me wrong, that you would show me you could be responsible. But you never did, so I did what had to be done. The company I built is bigger than you, bigger than me. It needs a leader, not a spoiled boy with a famous last name. Sophia is that leader. You were given chances, Jackson. You wasted them. Now you'll have to learn the hard way. Dad. The room went deathly silent as Jackson gripped the letter so tightly I thought it might tear in his hands. His breathing was labored, and his jaw clenched so hard I could almost hear his teeth grinding. I stood up, smoothing out my blazer as I made my way to the door. Looks like Dad knew exactly what he was doing after all, I said with a smile, not looking back. Enjoy the whiskey, Jackson. It's the last thing in this office you actually own. I left without a second glance, because I had already won. But I wasn't finished, not by a long shot. I didn't need to look back to know Jackson was still sitting there, fuming in my father's chair, a king without a kingdom. But I wasn't done yet. The next morning, I arrived at Davis Enterprises an hour before the scheduled board meeting. I walked past employees who had worked under my father for decades, men and women who knew my dedication and saw how I had put in the hours while Jackson had wasted his on spending. Still, there was tension in the air. The company was in limbo. My father's will had named Jackson as the sole inheritor, but my power of attorney gave me temporary control over operations. This meant the board had to. I walked into the executive conference room where the board members were already seated, waiting. The room felt heavy with anticipation. Men in crisp suits, some of them old enough to have built their fortunes alongside my father, sat at the table. Some were loyal to me, while others were waiting to see who would come out on top. Jackson strolled in 5 minutes late, his eyes bloodshot, either from too little sleep or too much whiskey. I didn't smile when he took his seat across from me because this was no longer a family discussion. This was war. Mr. Thompson, the chairman, folded his hands and cleared his throat. Let's get straight to the point. We have 2 potential successors, and we need to decide who's best suited to run this company. Jackson sat up straighter, adjusting his tie. Gentlemen, I think the will makes it perfectly clear. My father wanted me to run Davis Enterprises. That was his final decision. Thompson turned to me. Sophia? I met Jackson's gaze, then slid a stack of documents across the table. I'd like to present some evidence before the board makes its decision. Jackson scoffed. More legal tricks. I ignored him and continued. These are financial records from the last 4 years. They show a consistent pattern of reckless spending, personal debts, and failed investments. Everything tied directly to Jackson. I flipped to the next set of papers. These are internal emails from the finance department, warning about unauthorized company funds being redirected for personal use. Jackson's face flushed with anger. You had no right, he muttered. I remained unfazed. And this, I slid the final sheet forward, is an investment report showing that just 1 week before our father's death, Jackson tried to liquidate over $10 million in company assets to cover his personal debts. The room went dead silent. This was no longer a question of leadership. It was a question of trust. Thompson exhaled slowly, tapping the papers. Is this accurate? I nodded. All verified. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Jackson was gripping the table so tightly, his knuckles turned white. You can't do this, he stammered. I folded my hands calmly. I didn't do anything, Jackson. You did. Then I went in for the final strike. I pulled out one last document, the one I had saved for this exact moment. A motion for an internal audit, I said smoothly. This is a formal request for a forensic investigation into all financial transactions made under your authorization. If the board chooses to install you as CEO, this will be the first thing to happen under your leadership." Thompson leaned forward, his expression serious. "Are you suggesting there's been embezzlement?" I shrugged slightly. "I'm simply suggesting Jackson's financial decisions have been questionable, but if he truly has nothing to hide, then I'm sure he wouldn't mind a full investigation." Jackson's face twisted into one of panic, knowing full well what they would find. And so did I. Thompson turned to the rest of the board. "Gentlemen, I think we've seen enough." Jackson slammed his fist onto the table. "This is a setup! She's trying to destroy me!" Thompson turned to me. "Sophia, if we vote in your favor, what will your first act as CEO be?" I didn't hesitate. "Stability," I said firmly. "I will ensure that our investors, employees, and clients know that Davis Enterprises is in good hands. No reckless risks. No financial scandals." Thompson nodded. "And you, Jackson?" Jackson was still fuming, his breath heavy and uneven. His face was pale, and he searched the room desperately for someone to back him up. No one did. Because the truth was undeniable. He wasn't fit to lead. Thompson sighed. "Let's vote." I didn't even need to count the hands because I already knew. Unanimously, the board had just chosen me as the new CEO of Davis Enterprises. Jackson's chair scraped against the floor as he stood. His hands were shaking. "You think this is over?" he hissed. I stood, adjusting my blazer. "No, Jackson," I said smoothly. "I think it's just beginning." He stormed out of the room. I turned back to the board, my shoulders squared and my voice calm. "Gentlemen, let's get to work." Because I had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The moment I stepped out of the boardroom, I could feel the shift. The tension that had filled the air since my father's funeral was gone, replaced by a sense of certainty. Davis Enterprises was mine now. The executives I passed no longer hesitated before nodding their acknowledgement. Assistants who had once avoided eye contact now met my gaze with newfound respect. A leader had been chosen, and it wasn't Jackson. Speaking of my brother, he was nowhere to be found. I wasn't surprised. Losing the CEO title was only the beginning of his problems. There was still the matter of his financial misconduct. I stepped into my new office, my father's old office, and felt a strange mix of emotions. I had spent years sitting on the other side of this desk, learning from him. Now I was in the seat he had always meant for me. But my victory wasn't complete yet. I pressed the intercom. "Jessica, get me legal." A few minutes later, my father's longtime lawyer, Mr. Anderson, entered the office. He was old school, pinstriped suit, silver hair, a man who had helped my father build his empire from the ground up. He took a seat across from me. "I assume this is about Jackson," he said. I nodded. "I need to know exactly how much trouble he's in." Anderson opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick file. "It's bad," he said bluntly. I skimmed the top page. Millions in company funds had been funneled through questionable investments, many of which led back to Jackson's personal accounts. It was theft, plain and simple. And now, with my new authority, I had the power to decide how to handle it. Anderson folded his hands. "The board will want to press charges." I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle. "And if I don't?" He hesitated, then answered, "Then you'll be seen as weak. Worse, if you let this slide, investors will think Davis Enterprises tolerates financial misconduct." I nodded, resolute. "That's not an option. Find out where he is," I instructed, closing the file. "I'll handle this myself." I found Jackson exactly where I expected, at our father's estate, or rather, what used to be our father's estate. Now it was legally his, but not for long. I parked in the driveway and strode through the grand front doors without bothering to knock. Jackson was in the study, whiskey glass in hand, his appearance disheveled. His tie was undone, his shirt wrinkled, a man who had lost everything in the span of just 24 hours. When he saw me, he didn't even blink, just muttered, "Here to gloat?" As he swirled his drink. I shook my head. "I'm here to talk about your options." "Options?" he scoffed. "What options? You took everything from me, Sophia." I walked over to our father's large oak desk, the one Jackson had never been allowed to sit behind. I placed the file in front of him with a firm hand. "This is the evidence against you." Jackson froze, his hand hovering over his glass. I kept my voice steady. "If the board moves forward with charges, you're facing embezzlement, fraud, and financial mismanagement. That's a prison sentence, Jackson." His face drained of color as he grabbed the file and flipped through the pages, his panic now clear. This is exaggerated," he muttered under his breath. I crossed my arms, unfazed. "No, Jackson, this is reality, and right now, you've got one way out." His eyes met mine, and I let the silence stretch between us. I wanted him to feel the gravity of his situation, the enormity of his mistakes. Finally, I spoke again. "You're going to sign over your shares." His brow furrowed. "What?" "You heard me," I said, taking a step closer. "You still legally own the company, but without control. That means you've got one valuable thing left, your stock, and you're going to sell it to me." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. "If you do," I said smoothly, "I'll make sure the board doesn't press charges. You'll walk away with a payout instead of a prison sentence." Jackson gritted his teeth, the frustration building. "And if I don't?" I leaned over the desk, my gaze sharp. "Then I'll let the law handle it. And trust me, Jackson, they won't be as lenient as I am." The air between us thickened. For the first time in his life, Jackson had no power, no influence, no leverage, no father to bail him out, no money to buy his way out. Just me, offering him the only chance he had left. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard, and his hands trembled ever so slightly as he reached for the pen. Without another word, he signed. The final, irrevocable goodbye. I took the papers, ensuring every detail was legally binding. Jackson exhaled shakily, looking defeated. "So what now?" I stood, closing my bag and turning toward the door. "You disappear, Jackson. Take your payout, start over, but you don't come back." He looked at me, utterly defeated. "Is this what you wanted?" he asked quietly. "To destroy me?" I paused in the doorway, my voice calm. "No, Jackson," I said softly. "I wanted to save Dad's legacy. You destroyed yourself." With that, I walked out. The company was mine, and more importantly, the Davis name was finally where it belonged. I didn't look back, because Jackson Davis was just another lesson learned, and I had an empire to run. A week later, after Jackson had signed over his shares, I sat in the Davis Enterprises headquarters, gazing out at the skyline that my father had helped shape. It was over. The battle, the betrayal, the years of watching Jackson take everything for granted, believing he was untouchable. Now he was gone, disappeared with his payout, stripped of his power, his legacy, his future with the company. And I had everything. The board had officially appointed me CEO. I now owned the company outright after buying Jackson's shares. For the first time in years, Davis Enterprises was truly in the right hands. My first order of business? Undoing the damage Jackson had done. Sitting in my office, I met with my executive team, reviewing every department that had suffered under Jackson's reckless financial decisions. I cut out the wasteful projects he had initiated to line his own pockets. I restructured the failing divisions, bringing in new leadership, people who had earned their place, not inherited it. I personally reached out to our top investors, reassuring them that Davis Enterprises was stronger than ever. And just like that, confidence in the company returned. The stock price, which had plummeted after my father's death and the uncertainty surrounding the CEO transition, stabilized. Davis Enterprises was no longer just a family inheritance. It was a legacy, a vision, and I was the one leading it forward. A month later, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. "Sophia," came a tired, familiar voice. "Jackson," I replied, leaning back in my chair and pressing my fingers to my temple. "What do you want?" There was a long pause before he spoke, his voice hollow. "I lost everything." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "No, Jackson, you sold everything." Another silence stretched between us. He hesitated before speaking again. "I thought if I had the company, it would fix everything, that it would prove I was worth something." I closed my eyes briefly. Dad never cared about titles, Jackson. He cared about the people who built them. I get that now, he muttered. But did he really? Or was this just another fleeting moment of regret before he found yet another way to ruin himself? I don't expect you to forgive me, Jackson said quietly, his voice small. I exhaled slowly, finally saying, Good. He let out a weak laugh. It's ironic, isn't it? I used to think you were cold, that you were too obsessed with working hard and earning your place. I thought Dad would just hand me the company because I was his son. I shook my head, gazing out at the skyline. Jackson had never understood. I never wanted Dad to simply give me the company, I said, my tone firm. I wanted to earn it. A long silence followed before he let out a heavy sigh. Goodbye, Sophia. And just like that, the conversation was over, and he was gone. I stared at my phone, holding it in my hands for a while, letting the weight of his words sink in before I set it down and moved on. A week later, I stood in front of the entire company, ready to speak to our employees for the first time as their official CEO. Davis Enterprises was built on the foundations of hard work, sacrifice, and a vision that reached far beyond the scope of just one man, I began, my voice steady and sure. And today, I make you this promise. We will honor that vision. We will not let greed, entitlement, or misplaced power be the defining forces of our future. I let my eyes sweep across the crowd, feeling the shift in the room, the weight of the responsibility settling in. My father built this company from the ground up, but it is no longer just his legacy, it's ours. A wave of applause erupted around me, and in that moment, I knew. I hadn't merely won a battle against my brother. I had secured the legacy of my father, the dream he had worked tirelessly to create. Davis Enterprises would never be a playground for the entitled or the spoiled. It would be a beacon of perseverance, leadership, and integrity. And most importantly, it would be mine. Because Jackson never understood one key thing. Power isn't handed out. It's earned. And I had earned every bit of it.